New regulations, new teams, 22 cars, a new world champion, and a 7-time world champion with an uncertain future. Does that sound familiar to you? It's funny how sometimes the past catches up with the present, and in 2026 F1 feels very reminiscent of days gone by. Specifically to 20 years ago, in fact. 2006 was also the dawn of a new age in Formula 1, and the similarities between then and now are palpable. So before the 2026 F1 season starts, let's rewind the clock and see what was happening in F1 20 years ago. Number 1, new regulations. Just like 2026, 2006 also had brand new regulations concerning the engines, where V8 engines replaced V10s, and the big changes were down to the fact that Formula 1 and the FIA were concerned that engines were becoming too powerful and they wanted to clamp down on this. So we went from a 3-litre V10 engine to a 2.4-litre V8. And while on the face of it, it probably did look a disappointment, the V10 engine is still considered probably to be the best engine era of all the eras in Formula 1, just because of the noise and the rasp that the engine made. But you've got to say that the V8s were just as good, if not maybe arguably better, you could say. And I think that's down to the fact that in the V8 era, which ran from 06 to 2013, you have to say that we had a very competitive era between the engine manufacturers. No one really had a massive and competitive advantage over the other manufacturers. It was very close between all of them, and that's despite the fact that Renault really dominated the V8 era with all the championships that they won, and they started the V8 era as they ended the V10 era with a championship, and by winning the first race of the V8 era in Bahrain. So that was the big major change. Another change that I should mention is that we got a brand new qualifying format, which 20 years later is still run to this day, albeit slightly different. Obviously back then refueling was still part of Formula 1, so we have seen a few tweaks since then, but the free segment still remains to this very day. Number 2, Alonso versus Schumacher. 2006 also gave us a generational title battle between Fernando Alonso driving for Renault, who of course at that time was the reigning world champion, a brand new world champion. He was the young prince, and he was taking on the master, the 7-time world champion, the most successful Formula 1 driver of all time at that particular period, Michael Schumacher, who of course was driving for his beloved Ferrari. And it really was clash of the titans. The two of them had a fantastic season-long battle that went down all the way to the wire in Brazil over the 18 races that season. Fernando completely dominated the first half of the season. Those first 9 races, he won 6 of them and stood on the podium in every one of them, never finishing lower than second. And it looked as though at that point he was just going to walk away with it and claim back-to-back world titles. But then the narrative completely shifted, and Michael and Ferrari fought back with a vengeance. They never gave up. And over the next 7 races, they won 5 of them. And that included an emotional win at Monza, and also what turned out to be Michael's 91st and final ever win in Formula 1 at the Chinese Grand Prix. And that meant that going into the final 2 races, Alonso and Schumacher were both level, tied on 116 points. So without a doubt, momentum was on Schumacher's side going into those final 2 races, but then fate intervened. Michael was leading in Japan when his engine failed, and that allowed Alonso to take an important win, which meant that he went into that final race in Brazil needing just 1 point to claim the title. And that's exactly what Fernando did. He finished on the podium. Schumacher did everything he could. He fought back from an early puncture, and he was almost a lap down to somehow come back and finish 4th place, but it was not enough for him to beat Alonso to the championship and claim what would have been a record-breaking 8th world championship in his career. Number 3, Schumacher's retirement. Going into that 2006 season, there was plenty of speculation and rumours surrounding the future of Michael Schumacher, because his contract was due to run out at the end of the season. And of course there was a lot of talk as to whether he was going to renew his contract and stay at Ferrari for at least a season or 2, or he was going to call it a day. The rumours, as I seem to remember, started around Imola, which was the first European race of the season, so quite early in the year, and a lot of the talk was around whether Michael was going to re-sign or if he was going to call time on his fantastic and elusive career. In the end, this saga dragged on for a lot of the season and was not resolved until near the end. That was because Michael did not want any distractions, as obviously he was in that title battle with Alonso, so naturally he just wanted to focus on that and try and come out on top if he could. There are reports at the time, and that have come out since, that the Ferrari president Luca di Montezemolo wanted to bring in Kimi Raikkonen for 2007, but Michael was resistant to this because Naturally, Kimi was one of the best drivers, and Schumacher obviously had a lot of control over who his teammates could be. He was the clear number one, so he was obviously against Ferrari signing Kimi for 07. And in the end, Montezemolo got his way. He signed Raikkonen for the following season, and because Schumacher felt that it was unfair to push Massa out, obviously Felipe Massa was his teammate for 2006, and probably the fact that his status as the clear number one would be under threat if Kimi came into the team as his teammate, he decided ultimately that it was time for him to retire, and he announced this at the Italian Grand Prix at Monza. It was obviously quite an emotional moment because Schumacher had just won that race to reinvigorate his title hopes, and he was obviously the biggest driver, the biggest name in Formula 1 at that time, so for him to suddenly announce that he would be stepping aside and retiring was a huge shock. It was a sad moment for the sport, but he was walking away with his head held high, having achieved so much in his career, and he's still to this day one of the all-time greats. Number 4, Button finally takes his first win. It's hard to believe that going into 2006, Jenson Button had raced in exactly 100 Grand Prix, but was still yet to visit the top step of the podium. It had taken him so long just to get a podium in Formula 1, let alone a win, and yet this elusive first victory had still eluded him up to this point in his career. You have to say that it was a surprise that Button had still not won a race, because he was one of the best drivers on the grid at this stage. You have to say he was only really behind Schumacher, Alonso and Raikkonen in terms of raw talent. But there was hope for Jenson that he would take that first victory, because he did start the season very well. He finished 4th in the season opener in Bahrain, and then took his first podium of the season in Malaysia with a 3rd place finish. He then followed that up at the next race in Melbourne with a pole position, but he was unable to convert that into a victory. In fact, it was a disastrous race where he fell back through the field, and in the end didn't even finish the race because he retired literally metres from the checkered flag after his engine failed at the final corner. Then, as the season went on, Honda really began to fall back and underperform compared to their rivals. I think they really struggled with the development of that year's car, and because they were really struggling to score points, let alone a podium or a win, it did look as though that Jenson was going to go yet another season without taking that maiden victory. Even more so that when they arrived in Hungary during practice, Button actually had an engine failure, and the rules at that time meant that he had to take a 10-place grid drop because they had to change the engine for qualifying in the race. If you remember, that year's Hungarian Grand Prix was the first race in Hungary to ever take place in the wet. And in those mixed conditions, Button always thrived, and on this day, he put together a fantastic drive. He just cut his way through the field like they were standing still. And he went all the way from 14th to 2nd in the latter stages. And then, amazingly, Fernando Alonso, who was leading the race, came in for a pit stop, and as he came out of the stop, one of the wheel nuts came off and led him to spin off into the barrier and into retirement, leaving Button out on his own in front. You were just waiting for something to happen, but nothing was going to stop Jenson this time. He finally took that first elusive victory, and of course led to that immortal line that James Allen did on commentary, which to this day is one of the most memorable lines of commentary I can think of, certainly when I was growing up. It was a fantastic victory for Jenson, and it really was long overdue. Number 5, Montoya leaves mid-season. Juan Pablo Montoya is remembered for being one of the most exciting drivers of his era, but 2006 would end up being his swan song in Formula 1. And it seemed that he was always destined to leave Formula 1, particularly when he joined McLaren. It always seemed as though he and Ron Dennis, the boss of McLaren at the time, were always going to clash because they were such different personalities, and that's exactly what happened. Dennis had signed Montoya in 2005, not just because he was an exciting driver, but because he was ruthless, he was fearful, he did not fear anybody and was prepared to take on whoever it was and win his way. He didn't care what anybody thought of him. And that first year in 2005 had been a success. He won 3 Grand Prix, finished 4th in the championship, but 2006 had not started in the same manner. It was very inconsistent. He did take 2 podiums at Imola and Monaco, but they were surrounded by a bunch of retirements and poor results. So when F1 arrived at Indianapolis for the American Grand Prix, tensions between Montoya and McLaren were already sky high, to the point where Montoya was already considering leaving Formula 1 for good. And that race at Indy turned out to be the final straw for their relationship, because Montoya ended up causing a pile-up at the first corner that ended up not only taking himself out, but also taking his teammate out, Kimi Raikkonen, and half the field. I think it's fair to say that even before that crash, Montoya was becoming disillusioned with Formula 1, and he definitely had his sights set on racing in another series elsewhere. And even before he split with McLaren, he'd already been holding talks with NASCAR about driving in their series for 2007. And sure enough, he signed a deal with Chip Ganassi to race in NASCAR for 2007, and that's when he and McLaren ultimately decided to part ways and terminated his contract before the end of the 2006 season. So Formula 1 didn't even really get to say a proper goodbye to one of its most exciting drivers of the 21st century, and Juan Pablo bowed out of Formula 1 for good. In the end, he did have a successful career over in America, winning races in NASCAR and returning to IndyCar a bit later on in his career, and again winning the Indy 500 for a second time. So there you are, guys. That was what was happening in Formula 1 20 years ago. 2006, I have to say, was a fantastic year personally. I think it's very underrated, and if you are new to Formula 1, it's definitely worth the watch. Let's hope that 2026 turns out to be just as good. I cannot wait for this new season to start. But if you are new around here, don't forget to like the video, and please do subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.